because there's a few of us who don't know each other here today, maybe we could go around the room and say who we are. And I'll start us off. I'm Ed Lehman, and I've been involved with the Regina Peace Council for 50 plus years. So I started being active in 1970. And I can blame it on this young fellow over here who had already been active for a few years, thanks to his wonderful mother dragging him to demonstrations to make sure that he knew what side he should be on.
That was an easy guess.
Okay, and Heather, do you want to say something?
I'm Heather. Even though I'm married to Ed, he's my name, Critchlow, born now. I was always interested in basically social justice from the time I was growing up in Barbados. Immigrated to Canada 40 years ago, and met Ed 5 years later, and we hit it off. So, what can I say?
What can you do, eh?
Yeah.
The rest is history.
Yes, I'm the Vice President of the Regina Peace Council, and as Ed said, I've been active in the peace movement and movements for social justice, I guess, most of my life. Getting to be a senior now, so that's it. Now,
I'm Al Fricker. I'm too old. Way
Sorry.
too old.
Sorry.
Vietnam for 10 years. And remember the advisors? Well, now we've got them in the Ukraine. That's all I got to say.
Okay, I'm Joseph Reynolds, just a guy that cares about social justice in the city, First Nations, Indigenous issues, and just what's happening within Saskatchewan, and hopefully, there to address many issues on racism, poverty, homelessness, etc. So, thank you.
I'm Kathleen Donovan. I'm a U.S. expat from the Vietnam era, and I've been active in the peace movement all my life in various places.
Florence Stratton, a community peace and justice activist.
I'm Helen Sokoviev. I'm Ed's sister.
Oh,
Very well.
you do kind of look alike.
My name is Jenny, and I'm a friend of Heather and Ed for how many years? Many years, and I love knowing something about everything, so that's the reason why I'm here. They invited me, so I'm sitting here wondering what this is all about, and I hope to talk about it in the future.
Oh, we're supposed to say something about ourselves?
Yeah,
Whatever you want to call it.
Ron
What's your
Bourgeot,
name?
I don't know. In absentia from the new left.
Anyways, I'm Darcy Bellward. The reason why I'm here is I'm trying to get rid of the homelessness and whatever is out there. It's terrible. Anyways, I'm just a supporter of the group.
There's a little distractions there.
Oh, sorry. I'll repeat myself again. Oh.
Yeah, you're good. There's 2 chairs. 2 people, 2 chairs.
Brought everybody up here.
That's high math.
It's who?
High math.
There's a chair here. Can everybody see over me?
Yeah, I'm going to say.
Okay, Ed, we ended there on the introductions. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
We could finish.
Yeah.
going
Okay,
now.
sure. I'm Joanne, and Pat introduced me to these fine folks in the organization, but my dad hauled me to every demonstration, I think, during my entire childhood and adult years until he died at the age of 93.
I'm Ron Fisher. I'm a member of Regina Peace Council, and not very active, but I've been aware, which is kind of shameful to say that you're not active. That's the way it has been. I'm a friend of Ed and Heather's, and Dave.
Evelyn, and I'm a leftover from UBC Students for Peace and Mutual Disarmament. And we thought the end of the world was going to come. And now here is the same thing. We also think that the end of the world is going to come. So we are still waiting for it. And I have been with the Peace Vigil, and I'm with the Peace Council, Peace Council.
I'm Helmi Ugu, and I was interested in peace even when I was in university. We were protesting American involvement in saying Canada shouldn't just follow this friend, or so we say. And then many years later, I came to Regina and I heard about this ring.
Hi, I'm Candace. I'm a mental health worker for many years. I've seen the increase in the homelessness here and sort of systemic racism. And I know I'm a friend of Ann Heather for also a very long time. And ever since I was a young woman, I've been fascinated by Vietnam, Cambodia, all those places, because I used to hang out with the guys at the Air Force base in mine. Not that I support the American ideology at all, but the guys at the base were coming. And they were being stationed in Vietnam and Thailand and places, and I've always wanted to go there. So I felt this is a very safe way to do a trip.
Pat Colfax. I'm a member of the Regina Peace Council, longtime friend of Heather, and have been a peace activist on a low scale most of my life.
I'm Lauren, I'm a sister of Candace and a friend of Pat's, and she invited us to come, so we're here. I'm Joyce Anderson, and I'm joining the peace movement and trying to get out there and trying to get it over. I'm trying to attend every time I get a notice that you come on up. On this part. No Heather and Ed for a while. That's okay.
Okay. So maybe we can start. Oh, everybody said something about themselves. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Oh. I don't know what people were saying about this.
Well, mostly
Your name.
With peace and what struggles you've been involved with.
Okay, my name is Lenny Rivera, and I've been part of, in and out of the group for the last few years, and tried to participate before COVID as much as I could, but in the last 2 years, this is my first time back, so I want to hear about your experiences and all. Okay, sorry I'm late, cosa con
Begin our proceedings by acknowledging that we're meeting on Treaty 4 territory, the original lands of the Nahewa, Anishinaabe, Dakota, Lakota, and the homeland of the Native Nation. We respect and honor the treaties that were made in all territories, and we acknowledge the injustices of the past and are committed to move forward in partnership with Indigenous nations in the spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. And I think we know what we're here this afternoon. Ed and Heather recently returned from the World Peace Assembly in Hanoi, which was just several weeks ago. And of course, peace, I think, is an issue that is, today is on pretty much everyone's mind because of the critical situation in Eastern Europe, and not just in Eastern Europe, I think in the world, that we feel that there's a danger of a nuclear war at this time, probably maybe the greatest, I won't say the greatest in my lifetime, but is as great as probably as any time during my life. So I think Ed and Heather had a chance to meet with a lot, fellow peace activists from around the world, and we'll have some issue, we'll have information and we'll be able to give us some hopeful stories from what their experience in Hanoi, and some and also some of their experiences in Vietnam, and they had a chance to tour the country and see how the people in Vietnam are living and what are their progress and how things are there. So maybe whichever one of you would like to start off, I think maybe Heather.
Yeah, he's looking at me, so.
Yeah.
All right. So first of all, I echo Dave's greetings and welcome, and really pleased to see so many of you out and listen to this report. Excuse me. So what I'm going to report on is basically the conference itself. The conference, the 22nd Assembly of the World Peace Council, WPC, was held in Hanoi, Vietnam from November 22nd to 24th of this year. 108 delegates representing 58 organizations from 53 different countries participated in the assembly. The Vietnamese Peace Committee hosted this event for the first time in Vietnam. 3 representatives from the Canadian Peace Congress, one of the founders of the World Peace Council, participated in the assembly. This fellow was from Toronto. He's the president of the Peace Congress. The World Peace Council Assembly was preceded by a meeting of the Executive Committee of the World Peace Congress on November the 21st. This Executive Committee finalized the political declaration draft that was placed before the Assembly. And this draft is supposed to be sent off to different countries. There were many people there that talked about what was happening in their different countries. It discussed the Executive Committee has also discussed the general rules of conduct of the Assembly and the various committees, along with the criteria for election of the future delegates, future leadership. Delegates also agreed to adopt the declaration, which showed a message of determination to strengthen solidarity and gather the world's peace-loving and progressive forces together to continue fighting for peace, democracy, social justice, and sustainable development. This message holds significance in the current context, especially at a time when the world is facing wars, non-traditional security challenges, and environmental degradation. The president of the Vietnam Peace Committee, Juan Chu Lu, welcomed the delegates to the assembly. Socorro Gomez, the president of the World Peace Council, delivered the presidential address at the assembly. And Athanasius Pan Phyllis, General Secretary, his brief of the World Peace Council introduced the main political document and the task before the peace movement, which became the basis for discussion. The speeches made by Socorro Gomez and Panfilis underscored the new dangers and threats of peace, which were a result of increasing imperialist interferences and aggression. These threats are acting upon the already deep economic, social, and ecological crisis confronting the world. They also noted that present time was conducive to new struggles of the peace-loving people of the world, the way to counter and stop pro-war tendencies. Though the 22nd Assembly was delayed due to the coronavirus pandemic, it was noted that the intervening 6 years between the last Assembly and the present one was filled with activity and struggles around the world. Many of the member organizations all reported that they were involved in organizing street actions, demonstrations, seminars, debates, congresses, and regional meetings against offensive imperialists during this period. The present situation is intensifying. Imperialism is intensifying its aggressive policy of threat, sanctions, and blockades. This is visible in Latin America, where the U.S. imposed sanctions against Cuba and Venezuela, and they also imposed sanctions on Iran, Democratic People's Republic of Korea, and Russia in order to welcome their economies and destabilize their elected governments in these countries. The declaration also noted the growing attacks on the rights of Palestinians. This year, more than 200 Palestinian citizens were killed by Israeli armed forces. With the open support of the US and UK and the complicity of the EU, Israel is aggressively attacking Palestine, launched a military attack on Gaza, expanded its settlements to Palestine, and is implementing international law which discriminates against Arab citizens of Israel. There cannot be any peace in that area, and hence the world, and in the world, unless Israel attacks on Palestinian stop. The Palestinian state, with the June 4th, 1967 borders, East Jerusalem as the capital, is recognized. Similarly, the rights of Palestinians who were forced to migrate from their country due to continuous attacks of Israel and to return to their land, UN Resolution 194 has to be accepted. The declaration also noted the serious situation that has developed in and around Ukraine in recent years, particularly after the Maidan coup of 2014. The reactionary governments that came to power in Ukraine after the coup included neo-Nazi forces. The government had attacked the eastern regions of Ukraine for the last 8 years, which led to the death of more than 14,000 people by 2022. These attacks were carried out with the explicit support of the US, UK, and Canada. The war in Ukraine has its genesis from the time NATO started expansion and encirclement of Russia. Lots of people think that the war just started this year, that the conflict in Ukraine started years before, with that coup in 2014. The World Peace Council does not endorse the war in Ukraine. It expressed serious concern about the continuing loss of human lives and destruction caused by war. The World Peace Council Assembly thought that the people of Europe and the world are paying a heavy price due to this war. The growing prices of food, grains, essential commodities, and more importantly, the energy crisis that has led to causing immense pain to people. With winter setting in, people in Europe are suffering immensely due to the lack of energy for heating. The Assembly demanded an immediate end to war and call upon the authorities to resolve the issue through peaceful negotiations. It also rejected the various sanctions imposed on Russia and the sabotage of the gas pipeline carried out on the behest of the US and the UK state agencies. The World Peace Council also condemned the US for its aggressive and interventionist policies in Asia and the Pacific. They also noticed its opposition to the new reactionary military threats that are being seen in the region, including Quad and UCAS, which is Australia, UK, US. These are, in addition to already existing military threats between US and Japan and the US and South Korea. The Assembly also condemned US actions and provocations along Taiwan and reaffirmed its principal positions on the One China policy. It also denounced imperialist provocations and interference of internal affairs of China. The declaration also stated that U.S. is directly responsible for the deterioration of the Korean peninsula. They have more than 28,000 troops stationed in South Korea and the THAAD missile anti-ballistic defense system that's stationed there. Is regularly conducting military drills in the region. A continuing economic blockade of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea is now enforced by this military aggression. The intensification of joint military maneuvers by the U.S. and its allies is responsible for the escalation of tensions and grave threat to peace and stability. They also condemned the Fourth Fleet from Latin America regions to move and construct new military bases in the region. They also condemned the intervention policies of the U.S. in the internal affairs of various countries of Latin America, encouraging coup in regions and its attempt to destabilize elected government. They reiterated solidarity with Cuba and demanded the immediate lifting of the criminal and inhuman blockade imposed on that country. It also demanded the immediate removal of Cuba from the list of state-sponsored terrorism. The World Peace Council also extended its support to Puerto Rico, the people of Argentina, in their fight to gain control over their own territories, and they also expressed the solidarity with the people of Venezuela and other people fighting in that region. According to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, 2.2% of the world's GDP is spent on military and defense expenditures in 2021. That's roughly $2.113 trillion US. Out of this group, NATO spent more than 60%. According to the estimates, a small amount of this expenditure is spent on improving people's lives that have resulted in the elimination of hunger, the lack of clean water, and many curable diseases around the world. But the countries led by the US are not ready to undertake this task because they're more concerned about their dominance in the world markets and natural resources rather than saving lives and improving people's living conditions. The Assembly elected a 40-member executive council and 13-member secretariat to carry forward the activities. Blab Sen Gupta from All India Peace and Solidarity Organization was elected the new president of the World Peace Council. Socorro Gomez, a former president and representative, she was president of 14 years, representative of the Brazilian Center for Defense, Solidarity and Peace, stepped down as president. The Assembly re-elected representatives of the Committee of International Detente and Peace Van Phyllis as General Secretary, Heracles, Sadov, oh goodness gracious. What?
Okay,
As the executive secretary, in regional meetings, conveners who are elected on behalf of the Canadian Peace Council. Miguel was elected and gave a report. The 22nd Assembly concluded on the evening of the 24th, thanking the Vietnamese Peace Committee of Vietnamese Union of Friendship Organization for the excellent arrangements they made for the successful assembly. On November the 25th, the Hanoi Peace Council was held.
Peace Conference.
Was held in which the newly elected president of the World Peace Council, Sen Gupta, and representatives of various international fraternal organizations for the World Federation of Trade Unions, the Women's International Democratic Federation, and the World Federation of Democratic Youth, and other support panels. Those of the Assembly, Vietnamese Peace Council, and Vietnamese Union of Friendship Organizations arranged visit to the mausoleum of Ho Chi Minh, the great anti-colonial freedom fighter and revolutionary. The president of Vietnam, Nguyen Van Phu, met the delegation and interacted with them at the presidential office at the former Indochina Governor's Palace. The president of the Vietnam Fatherland Front also organized a reception for the delegates and had a brief reception at Quan Ninh, which was near Halong Bay. On the last day, the delegates were taken to Halong Bay, one of the 7 more modern wonders of the world. The 22nd Peace Assembly has been successful, creating the milestones in the World Peace Council's 70-year development history. President of Vietnam Union Friendship Organization, Ambassador Nguyen Pham Nha told the press on November the 25th. And she's a very, very intelligent woman. She told us a little bit about what Vietnam was doing, how it was progressing, and she expressed gratitude of generations of Vietnamese people for the great contribution and valued support of the World Peace Council and international friends, including many people who were gathered at the meeting. What she also stated is that Vietnam today is a peaceful, independent, free, prosperous, and happy country. There was also a great opportunity this was a great opportunity to promote Vietnam to the world and international friends. The Vietnamese Union of Friendship Organizations and the Vietnamese Peace Council will continue its activities to respond to the appeals of the World Peace Council and contribute initiatives to joint efforts, continue promoting peace, settling disputes by peaceful means, and joining efforts to fuel sustainable development. They will also focus on protection of natural resources, climate change responses, and improve the quality of education and training and human resources. Thus equipping citizens with knowledge about the laws and about peace, and to make each of them an ambassador of peace. And education continues to be one of the top priorities in Vietnam. the Vietnam Peace Council and the Vietnamese Youth Union Field Friendship Organization not only hosted the assembly successfully, also showcased transformation of Vietnam through progressive development. Delegates spoke highly of Vietnam through preparations, from agenda to the reception and coordination with the World Peace Council Secretariat and the World Peace Council leaders, leaving a good impression of the capital city and Vietnam.
I have two things I'd like to add. As Heather mentioned, this was the first time a World Peace Assembly was held in Vietnam. Usually assemblies are held every 3 years, but because of COVID, this was 6 years since the last assembly. After the welcoming by the host, the first speech was made by Socorro Gomez. Socorro Gomez is now 71, and she's been the leader of the World Peace Council for 14 years. And she thought, it was time for change. But she's still a very dynamic old lady. Like Heather and I had a little private, you could say, meeting with her, and we don't understand a word of Portuguese, but we could feel the emotion from her very, very strongly. She's very passionate about her beliefs. She stressed in her first speech that there's intensification of conflict in the world, and she denounced the possibility of nuclear war and pointed out that the present situation is largely the responsibility of the United States and its allies. There's some conflicts going on. I don't know who is exactly responsible. One that comes to my mind is Morocco is involved in oppressing the Western Sahara. I don't know if the United States has a hand in that or not, but that might be one case where the United States isn't directly involved. Ms. Gomez stressed that there has to be the construction of an alternative. And she said the alternative is growing, and she cited the work being done by Cuba, Venezuela, Russia, Iran, and China, and referred to a hopeful movement in Latin America as well. So generally speaking, the countries of Latin America are trying to forge their own way independent of the United States. Gomez talked about the work of the World Peace Council against NATO within the last couple years, especially with other organizations and against the U.S. bases around the globe. The U.S. currently, and that was a point of some debate at the conference. I was surprised that debate got so sharp. And it's because some people were insisting, well, the U.S. has 180 some bases. And other people were saying, no, that's wrong. There have hundreds more bases. So then there's a question of, well, what do you want to consider a base or not? So there may be up to 700 pieces of land around or more around the world that the United States is actually using to attack other countries from. Socorro Gomez said the World Peace Council has a great responsibility, hope, and determination of building change, and that our perspective must help us with our plan of action in unity to work with others for a world of cooperation and respect. And I think the Chinese are constantly stressing that theme, that we have to work in unity in the world against the two big threats of our time, the danger of nuclear war and the environmental situation. The Secretary General of the World Peace Council, Capoulas, discussed in his speech an increase in imperialist aggressiveness and pointed out that the contradiction of our era is the increase of technical achievements and productivity of the labor force on one hand, while conditions for working people and general population of many countries have declined, and wealth concentration is in fewer and fewer hands. And I know from seeing studies regarding Canada and the United States, that's certainly the situation in North America, where the top 1% is getting more and more at the expense of the rest. He explained that the only hope is with people changing the system, and that this assembly is a continuation of the struggle of the people for a better life and for life itself. The assembly worked out a document that's very long and detailed, and I'm not going to bore you with all the details of it, discussing the world situation and a plan of action. There was an agreement that the top World Peace Council leaders would visit Syria and Palestine soon to express solidarity with the people there. Years back, leaders from the World Peace Council had gone to those two areas and felt that they should be going there again. Some other countries singled out for solidarity by many speakers were Cuba, and Venezuela, China, Western Sahara, and Vietnam itself. And I don't remember the figure, but many, many people in Vietnam are still suffering as a result of Agent Orange. And the United States, to this day, despite having good relations with Vietnam on a whole range of issues, in fact, the Vietnamese told us that they have very comprehensive relations with the Americans now, has not given one nickel to help with the problem of Agent Orange. Vietnam has now a stable economy. They say they have a socialist-oriented market economy. I'm not enough of an economist to explain in great detail the ins and outs of their economy, but what we could see was that people are look healthy, and they're eating enough, and you don't see people begging, you see people working. They say poverty has gone from 30% in 1992 to 5.2% in 2022. They say they've made considerable gains in literacy, health care, that there's gender equality, or gains at least in having gender equality. And their objective is to develop a prosperous and happy country. So for the next 5 years, they expect to make further gains to get more people out of poverty. One thing I didn't know is there's 64 ethnicities in Vietnam. So maybe sometime we should be comparing notes with them and find out how do they have everybody living in what seems to be harmony. The founder of the Vietnam Peace Committee in 1950 was Ho Chi Minh. One of the outstanding speeches made at the Congress was by Jamu Baraka, and if you go on Facebook, you can find his speech, or pardon me, on YouTube. I don't know why I want to confuse them. Okay, if you bear with me I'd like to read another speech, though, given by the President of the U.S. Peace Council, because I think a lot of what he says about the U.S. pertains to us here. He's also the coordinator of the global campaign against U.S. NATO military bases. And what they've done in the U.S. is they help kickstart the formation of a united campaign, international campaign against U.S. military bases. I'll skip the greetings. He says, our world is going through fundamental transformations, and as a result, is witnessing dangerous military confrontations as marked by the current crisis in Ukraine. This crisis, more than anything else, is a direct result of the U.S. and European imperialism's efforts to encircle Russia by the eastward expansion of NATO to the Russian borders, turning Ukraine into another military base for NATO, and thus causing an existential threat to the security of the Russian Federation. Now, I don't think everybody in the meeting agreed with that exactly, but I think everyone did agree that the U.S. and, for us, Canada also, are not acting in a way to promote peace. Unfortunately, he says, many have fallen for the imperialism's propaganda of one-sided condemnation of Russia alone for violating the United Nations Charter. There is no doubt that global peace and security of all nations depends on creation of an international order based on the principles outlined in the UN Charter. But to blame Russia alone for the violation of the UN Charter is to ignore the most important aspects of the history of the world since the destruction of socialist state in the Soviet Union in 1991 and the resulting collapse of the socialist town. Since then, our world has been witnessing constant violations of the UN Charter by the U.S. and European imperialist powers in their effort to impose their hegemonic domination over the world. Now, he could, but as typical Americans are, they forget about Canada. Canada now is very much moving in lockstep with the Americans, even though there were, in the past, say, 50 years maybe, there were quite a few points where Canada did not join in. Canada did not join in the war in Vietnam openly, and it did not join in the war in Iraq, to cite two examples. So he gives some examples of U.S. and Europe. In 1998, for 78 days, NATO attacked, dropped 28,000 bombs, and shattered Yugoslavia into pieces without the consent of the United Nations. In 2001, as a response to the 9/11 attack, U.S. declared an indefinite war on terror, affecting at least 60 countries including 7 targeted for illegal regime change. And there was a list of them. I don't remember them all now. But Bush openly said what countries they wanted to go in and change the government. In 2003, U.S. and members of the Coalition of the Willing illegally attacked and invaded Iraq in defiance of the UN Security Council. And I think we can I think it was Prime Minister Regina at that time, if I remember correctly, who said, no, we don't want to do this. In 2011, US, UK, and France unilaterally and without the consent of the UN Security Council attacked Libya and killed its leader, Muammar Gaddafi. Starting in 2011, US, NATO, and regional allies started a proxy war in Syria by arming and funding terrorist groups, a war that is still taking innocent lives. In 2014, the US staged a coup with the help of neo-Nazi forces in Ukraine and established a pro-NATO government there, which led to the massacres of the Russian and ethnic Russian population in eastern Ukraine. Throughout this period, the US and European allies have imposed illegal, unilateral economic sanctions on more than 40 countries of the world, causing the death and debilitation of hundreds of thousands of innocent people. And of course, one should mention the illegal occupation and annexation of Syrian and Palestinian territories by Israel with full support of the United States. So when we were having this discussion, February 24th and 25th, I can remember the media going full blast against Russia. It was as if all these things I just referred to had never happened. And this was supposed to be the most horrible, and it is horrible, and we shouldn't say it's not horrible, but the attack on the Ukraine was presented as the most horrible thing since the Second World War. You know, well, for people living in all these other countries, they have been going through war, in some cases, for a long, long time. And on that list, he didn't go into what the U.S. has been doing in South America. I don't want to, he goes into further a discussion of Russia and China and their efforts to counter what the U.S. is doing. I don't want to take up all the time on that, except to say that the U.S. has a plan, and they spelled it out in their documents. They want to bring Putin to his knees, which really means they want to carve up Russia. And after, their plan is to carve up Russia first and then go after China. And, I think that's the reality of the situation. And I think in Canada, the more Canada relations with China get worse, the worse it is for Canadians. Our living, there were some people got on the bandwagon against Russia saying, Russia, we gotta affect Russia's market with the United States, and then we, Canada, can move into their market and economically benefit. Well, it's a lot of wishful thinking and hogwash. We should not be thinking in terms of benefiting from anybody's suffering in the world, including the Russians. China is our second biggest market. And to have any room to maneuver when we're negotiating with the United States, we need to be friends with other people than the United States. What are the implications from all of this for Canada? In my opinion, there's a need to revive the Canadian Peace Congress as an organization. And where possible, from Regina, we will help. So if there's groups somewhere else that we can drive to help, we will do that. In Regina, our Peace Council needs to revive itself with younger people, but not just younger people, anybody who wants to come and work for peace. We need to do more solidarity work than we've done. Over the years, we've done a lot of solidarity work. I can remember as a young person, David Gale spoke publicly at a meeting with a Lutheran minister, and I can't remember who the other speakers were. For example, calling for the United States to get out of Vietnam. So the history of the Peace Council stems from that work of that time and the work on the first Stockholm Appeal, which was the first ban the bomb petition of 1950 and 51. And prior to the war in Vietnam, there was a war in Korea that the Regina Peace Council and other peace councils worked to end. We've worked on the question of Venezuela. We could do more work in that. We've worked on the question of Cuba a very, very little bit. We could do more work in the area of solidarity with Cuba. I personally think it's rather criminal that the U.S. still insists, after 60 years, of having a blockade on Cuba. Heather and I returned home with a wealth of information. It's so much information, it's overwhelming, because we went to meetings for about 5 days straight, and all day we would be listening to speaker after speaker after speaker. And everybody, of course, once the speeches got going, after the first 3 or 4, well, then everybody wanted to kick at the cat and wanted to say their bit about their country. But really, after a while, you start to see common patterns emerge. So that if the United States wants to attack a country, they will always do a big propaganda job against the people of the country and against the leader of the country. So the person could be an absolute saint, but over here in North America, and we're the ones with the strongest media, and of course we have Hollywood to go with the media to pull the wool over our eyes. And we don't even recognize sometimes that a lot of the war that's going on is because the military companies make huge, huge profits off of it. And I'm sure there are a lot of Canadian companies who are also benefiting from war. We found out a lot about struggles I didn't know much about, like I mentioned, the Western Sahara, even Puerto Rico. There was a young woman there from Puerto Rico, and she was telling us that there's a Canadian company involved in the electrical business in Puerto Rico. And they're having huge problems in Puerto Rico because their electricity is not stable. But this Canadian-American company is just interested in profits and not really providing proper service for the people there. We'd like to thank all of you for coming today, and we hope you'll have lots of questions and comments. And we'd like to thank everyone who donated to us before we left, and for your moral support. I can say for myself, I find it harder now going overseas and coming back, because like it's been a week already and I still seem to be suffering from jet lag. But I find going east harder than going, going. I have to think where I was.
I think you have to go east then.
Anyway, when we came back, we were flying into the darkness and lost a day. And when we came back here, we didn't know what day we were, we were kind of not quite with it anymore. Too many hours in the air. It was very encouraging to meet so many like-minded and like-hearted peace workers from around the world and in other countries. The movements are being successful in winning youth to their ranks, and there is an upsurge in many countries. So I'm hoping that eventually that will happen here. I remember the first years of working against the Vietnam War, that wasn't the thing to do in Regina. But then, I would say the students were the most active group. And the students from the university came and demonstrated outside of the high schools and handed out literature and got a lot of high school students also involved. And just what was going on in the United States. And on our TV, we could see more of what was going on than Americans could on their TV. At that time, like I'll always remember the picture of a young girl who had been burned, and she was running with no clothes because her clothes had all been burnt off of her. And she presently lives in Eastern Canada and is still alive. Anyway, I'll stop there and hope you have lots of comments and questions.
Floor is open.
And I'd like to know if there was any Canadian media at this conference.
No.
Of any description.
No.
Not even an independent.
No. No.
Oh.
No.
Well, that says a lot right there.
I looked, I did some searches while we were there and after we got home to see you. We were covered by the Vietnamese media and by the Cuban media. And that's all. And so Heather and I will try to do something to see if we can, that's one of the things I think we need to do. Yes, Mark.
I just add, I'll ask a question, but I want to just add this. I can remember what you said about Gretchen. And the thing is, it was in the United States, he was on national television. I think it's these programs they have on Sunday morning. And they're asking him why he was opposed to the war, the pending war in Iraq. And he made the statement, he says, where does this end? He says, we're opposed to it, because where's it going to go? What's it going to lead to, But at the same time, here in Saskatchewan, the SFL formally endorsed the invasion of Iraq. That's something to bear in mind.
Can you repeat that?
The SFL formally endorsed the invasion of Iraq when the media was building the hype and the liberals were opposed to it. But I just wanted to, ask, were there any delegates from Ukraine and Russia?
There was,
and
he wasn't I don't know if I could call him a delegate. There was a lone professor from Moscow. And there was
That's it, eh?
nobody else. But as far as the SFL goes, what I think is a problem with the SFL, and this is just my personal opinion, but was a trade unionist until my place of work closed. I was 10 years at McGavin's Bakery. And active during that time with the SFL, is the SFL has a tendency to follow very closely the political position of the NDP. And the NDP in recent time are supporters, it seems, of what the Liberal Party foreign policy. So the Liberal Party foreign policy is good, their position will be good. If it's not good, they will compete with the Conservatives as to who can have the more right-wing foreign policy. So the NDP, when there's a budget presentation, for example, and they're discussing how much should go to the military, sometimes the NDP will jump in and say, well, they should raise it higher. And give some excuses of, well, our boys have to get, proper equipment and so on.
Yeah.
And so I think that SFL problem is also a problem with the NDP. And it also represents what is happening in not just the NDP, but with social democracy on a world scale. We know the communist movement went through some crisis a few years back. Well, that's also a process going on with the Social Democrats and the Socialist International of having to figure out where they should stand. Should they just be a movement that wants some very small incremental reforms, or should they be a movement following the example of people like Salvador Allende of Chile?
I'm not to dwell upon it, but I mean, I was in the room when this was brought up with the SFL, and the SFL was there, and they announced that we, endorsed the invasion of Iraq, and there's a response to that about getting your head straight, But you're right on that. The NDP in Saskatchewan is a Liberal Party's abandoned social democracy and went into neoliberalism.
I mean, my experience with the SFL was a little at an earlier stage, and I was able, without any difficulty, to get the SFL to pass peace positions, peace motions. And sometimes I would get up, I wouldn't know who my seconder was going to be, and I would make a proposal hoping somebody will agree with me, and somebody would that I didn't even know, and the motion would pass.
Wow.
Just have a question. Was there anything discussed on what would be done, to support Haiti against American?
To support what?
Support Haiti against what Canada and the United States have been doing there. They've been doing terrible interference over many, many years there that has destroyed the country. Was there anything discussed at the at the meeting about that at all?
Okay, I didn't hear which country.
Haiti.
Haiti.
Yeah.
Yeah, Haiti was one of those countries that was part of the list. And that's another area we've been starting to do some work on. And when we had our send-off meeting, Heather spoke quite a bit at that meeting about Haiti. And she's written now quite a bit about Haiti, and when we put out our Saskatchewan Peace News, that's one of the articles that we're going to feature. And I think we'll be discussing Haiti for numerous issues because it's a real black mark on Canada. That Canada is probably going to be part of an invasionary force into Haiti. They'll call it something else, of course, but it will be an invasionary force. The people of Haiti aren't happy about having governments imposed on them from the outside. But I would say the United States and Canada seem to think that the problem then is to deal with the people who are unhappy by putting them down. Yes.
Yeah, two things. You spoke about learning more about Western Sahara. Have you encountered the film by Josh Campbell, who teaches?
I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, well, that's a very, very valuable. I think it's available on the internet. I mean, he did that film, I think, as a thesis or something when he was at the U of R, and he currently teaches at Miller High School. So it should be readily available in Regina.
Yeah, so maybe that could become an activity of the Peace Council where we would show it.
Yeah.
And invite, people to attend. Yeah, thank you.
My other thing is, I wonder, was there any criticism of China at the conference?
Yes.
I mean, I've got two things. I mean, re-Taiwan and re-China's exploitation of African countries, following in the footsteps of the Western world, starting with, all the European colonizers and the Americans and Canadians. Now, China is doing exactly the same thing.
Well, I don't agree with you that China's doing exactly that.
I was in Sierra Leone. They didn't even hire Sierra Leonean workers to build their stadiums or whatever. They brought Chinese people with them. And did they leave anything? They left the stadium behind, but in the meantime, they're exploiting all the natural resources of the country and giving very little to Sierra Leone.
Anyway, that was one of those cases where I would say the delegates were divided, and especially some of the Filipino delegates. There were quite a big group from the Philippines, and some of them have their differences with China.
See, I don't think it does any good to idealize some big world power.
No, but I think
that's what it seems to me the World Peace Council is doing.
No, well then they didn't do a very good job of relaying their views. I think the World Peace Council agrees with China on the need for world cooperation, and that problems have to be solved by negotiation. I think on those things we can definitely agree. On the ins and outs of what's going on in China, I don't fully know.
I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about what China is doing in the rest of the world, particularly in what the southern, the priorly colonized, European colonized countries.
Well, yeah.
I think you have to be clear and make a sweeping statement. There's a big difference between what China does in the world and what the United States does in the world. China does not live off the rents. And yes, they do that. They go in and they're doing it in some countries in Africa where they, there's a big difference between the two. That they will say, well, we will help you create a textile industry more than what you already have. And we will provide the marketplace for your textiles. Yes, they do bring in their own labor force. But what comes after the fact is the drain of the national economy of these African or otherwise other countries that is channeled back into the United States does not channel back into China. They don't do that. and they don't have military bases all over the world. There's a big difference.
I was wondering, is any joint decision taken, like at the end, did they decide, okay, the World Council is going to, for instance, make a petition, or is anything going to come out of this?
Okay. There were some concrete proposals with some dates that were put forward, for example, on the question of Cuban solidarity, Venezuelan solidarity, solidarity with Palestine. But every national group decides really on their own what they're going to take up. Sort of similar to what we do as a peace council, we tackle what we feel we have the capacity to tackle, and sometimes there's huge areas that really call out for attention that we're not able to address properly. And following this international meeting, there will be some regional meetings, and I think at the regional meetings there will be people going from the different countries who will then try to coordinate, say in the region of the Americas or the region of the Middle East or so on, at least have more coordination within the regions. It's a huge problem. Yeah.
Can I just comment on that? I think that has to do with the situation that people find themselves in. If you're in